I can't tell you what a pleasure this is, and some days a young boy gets to realize his dream, and I am so honored here to have as my guest Paul Petersen, a fellow whom I've watched for years and years and years and years, and Paul's career is a continuum going through acting and singing, through novels, and now through advocacy work. And a fellow whom I've watched and come to know, just a gentleman and just a great guy, and most importantly, someone who agreed to be a guest on Connecticut Morning. And Paul, how are you doing? How you been?
Well, I've been fine, Tony. Thanks so much for asking. All is well, and we got a beautiful sunny day out here, so I'm sitting down comfortably and ready to talk.
Great, and you know, we're going to show a picture, and obviously you can't see this from where you're at. You know, perhaps you'll be able to see it at a later date. And it's a picture from the Donna Reed show of Donna staring very quizzically at Willie Mays in catcher's equipment. And it is such an incongruous picture. And you know, that's probably a good part to open. You did a few shows with Willie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we did 2 shows with him. He was a wonderful guy to be around. Of course, I was in awe. In fact, one show we had Willie Mays, Don Drysdale, and Leo DeRocher, all on the same show. And I got to put on the Tools of Ignorance, the catching outfit, and actually catch Don Drysdale while he pitched to Willie Mays, who kept stroking these home run balls, one after another And you know, you just sit there and go, oh my God, these are Major League ball players. It was a great honor to work with them.
Wow, and you know, I mean, who wasn't in love with Donna Reed? What a lovely lady.
Well, she was, and of course, you know, for me, my family also hails from Donna's home state of Iowa, so we obviously knew who she was even before I got started on the Donna Reed show. In fact, my grandpa Burr, who is also an Iowa lad, walked up to Donna on the first day of shooting and looked her right in the eye and said, "Donna Bell Mullinger, I knew your dad." It's because they were born in adjacent counties. And it was just amazing. I was mortified. But from that point, I never, I called her Mom all the time, or Miss Reed. That was it.
Yeah, just such a presence she was. And, you know, when I think of you, I think of you kind of being homegrown to the whole thing of acting and singing, and, you know, where you're at today with respect to the advocacy work. And how did your career come about as a young lad, and where did you first go?
Well, it's a simple and straightforward story because it reflects the reality for most kid actors. I got started in the business because my mother was bigger than me. Look, I loved to sing. I was taking dance lessons and singing lessons from the time I was like 6 years old, and I was appearing in a lot of local events in and around Southern California once we had moved back to Southern California. And one day I got a call for an audition at the Disney Studios, and it was for the Mouseketeers. And out of the thousands of kids, and I mean literally thousands of kids who came to sing and dance, they hired 16, then a total of 24, and I was one of them, because I could sing and I could dance.
Wow, and you know, and I guess in the sad passing we had yesterday of Annette, I guess you were part of that original gang.
Yes, indeed I was, and stayed friends with Annette throughout her life. And more importantly, my television sister, Shelley Fabre. People will, I hope, recall that Shelley was Annette's best friend on the Spin and Marty series, and they stayed chums right to the end. And so I was always aware of what Annette was up to and where she was and how her kids were. Of course, I knew she and when she was married to Jack. And then as her illness took hold back in the 90s, it was, you know, it's a terrible sadness, because the multiple sclerosis is a horrible disease to have to not only live with, but in Glenn's case, to become the caretaker for a person that's afflicted. It was a long way from diagnosis to death.
And for sure, and she carried it with grace and dignity, and she was really, I think, for a lot of us, kind of like our first movie or TV girlfriend, if you will. And
absolutely. I mean, for millions of red-blooded American boys, she was the bomb.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, if I'm not mistaken, you had remained a Mouseketeer only for a brief period of time.
Oh, that's right. I was the first kid they fired. So after 7 weeks, I was fired for conduct unbecoming a mouse. Because the truth is, Tony, I had no idea that a young performer is not supposed to be a child. You're supposed to be a young adult. And I was a 9-year-old boy who saw ladders and had to climb them. If somebody ticked me off, I would get in fights with the other Mouseketeers. It's just not professional conduct. And after about 7 weeks, after the opening of Disneyland, where we all performed, there was a phone call after a very bad Friday afternoon, and I was discharged. Simple as that. And I deserve to be.
It's really something. Now, I've heard both sides of the coin, and why I'm so happy I have you here today. I've heard about Walt being very good to the kids that remained, and then I've heard other stories that perhaps that wasn't the case. And I mean, based on someone who was there, how did Walt treat the, shall we say, the remaining Mouseketeers, throughout the course of their lives and their tenure as stars?
Well, actually, pretty well. Even though I had a rocky start with the man that we all of us called Uncle Walt, he insisted on that. The fact is, even after being fired, the very first job I had after the Donna Reed show was off the air, so we're talking now 1966, Walt himself asked me to come play in his last movie. We didn't know it was going to be his last movie, Happiest Millionaire. He got over it, I got over it. It was grand to be back on the lot. And I'm a big fan of his. I know some people, after reading Walt, Mickey, and Me, a book that I wrote and it was published in 1977, people thought I had it in for Walt. And that wasn't true at all. I just tried to tell the reality as I saw it as a young performer. After talking with all of the Mouseketeers, because they were all still around then. There was, believe it or not, a time when there was no such thing as a theme park. There was life before Disneyland and then Disneyland, and you certainly can't minimize the man's accomplishments. He definitely impacted our culture.
Yeah, and absolutely, positively, no doubt. And I mean, where I stand in admiration of you is you got to work with Cary Grant.
Well, yes, that was one of the great experiences of my life. In fact, when I look back over all of the acting part of my life, the 7 months that I got to spend being Cary Grant's oldest son in the movie Houseboat, that was perhaps the most fulfilling professionally, because I was learning every day from Mr. G. What a master, not only as a talented man, but as a professional, how to conduct yourself, how to live up to and exceed what is expected of you. He was something to be with, lots of fun.
Well, I'll tell you, and all the movies Cary Grant was in, when I think of Cary Grant, I think of when Dodger Stadium had that little celebrity area right behind home plate, and you would see a gray-haired Cary Grant assiduously watching every single pitch, stroking his chin, and next to him's Diane Cannon kind of tossing the hair ham at the ball game, and he's not even paying her any mind. He's watching every pitch of this ball game, and it's just it's probably was his approach to acting.
Well, and look, he was larger than life. Not only was he drop-dead handsome and talented, he had all the money that he required. He had a beautiful relationships and friendships. And look, his friendship with Donna Reed was important to me getting my job on the Donna Reed show, because he told her that he enjoyed working with me, that I was a professional with abilities, and that if she could get a handle on my energy, we'd do just fine. Look, he was quite a guy, and I liked Hollywood when we had stars that were bigger than life.
Yeah, and it's really something which is a discussion that we'll get into, I'm sure, as we go. I think of you, and I think of you coming through as a very young actor to a singer, to a personality, then leaving the business, then getting into books, and then in your advocacy work. And I was sitting here, I was trying to make a list of just the whole litany, if you will, of, shall we say, abused child actors. And this is just a list I made. There's Mickey Rooney, Jackie Cooper, Jackie Coogan, the Little Rascals, Rusty Hamer. And give us, if you will, sort of an evolution, probably going back, if you want to go back as far as Jackie Coogan, you're certainly welcome. Farther before that, I think we all need an education in what is expected of child actors and the work that you do today because of what has happened and because of, like, in the Lohan situation and such, is what's still going on, frankly.
Well, it is, and the reason it's still going on is the composition of becoming a child star has not changed. Remember, children don't sign up for this stuff. They are brought to the ball game. So the relationship that the kids have with their parents is a key component. And I always tell people, just assume that the kids that you see are, in fact, at that moment in time, the best and the brightest. And depending on the level of success, they may have to sacrifice their education and character development to continue to please you. And that's part of the difficulty. It is difficult work for a child because unbeknownst to the performer, you are missing out on the important element of childhood, which among them are things like secrets and silences, a chance to participate, to find your place in the pecking order, which is critical for any young person. And then there are the other nasty things like fame, the money, often overwhelming money, and the fact that in these days in particular, the fame never goes away. Jackie Coogan's experience in the 20s, when they called him the world's boy king. He was incredibly successful. And yet, his mom ended up spending all of his money. Because you see, when you get down to the nuts and bolts, children are the property of their parents. In fact, a law we changed in California said as follows, Tony. Parents of a working child are entitled to its custody, income, and services.
And we're using it as the pronoun. Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Tony.
We're using it as the pronoun. That's the amazing thing. The child is an object, you're saying.
Well, that is correct, because they are a possession. You see, the assumption is that the parent will always do the right thing by their child. And sadly, over vast experience, we're talking 100 years now, it's just the opposite. Parents will often do exactly the wrong thing. The ability to say no is a critical component in parenting. And too many show business parents who are acting out their own fantasies, we call it transference, or because the family becomes economically dependent on the child, will suddenly, without even knowing it sometimes, begin to take a back seat in terms of their own welfare to that of their child's career. And that is a terrible mistake to make.
It's quite a quite a tale. And as far as and you raise that point of a child who in effect is that kid, and then they more or less, I mean, the classic example, I guess, in the beginning was Shirley Temple, who everybody thought of as the little girl, and like we would sit and the greater New York area and watch a Shirley Temple movie, and it's like, okay, kid, Shirley Temple will be on after the commercial, and we see a grown-up lady, and it was like, well, that's not Shirley Temple, and we don't realize these people grow up.
Well, that of course is the undeniable cruelty of growing up. And as I mentioned earlier, the images don't go away. And yet, your body is changing, your voice is changing, your interests are changing because that's natural to a kid. And yet, you're stuck like the bug in amber that you see in Jurassic Park. And that becomes a very difficult transition from childhood to adulthood. And I think that is where the trouble is. If your career has melted away, as it often does, because who says you're going to grow up to be capable of competing with the people who flood into Hollywood? Who says? Who says you're going to have another hit record? It's not written down anywhere that that's going to happen. And if you don't have an alternative, if you don't have your eye farther down the road than just that momentary employment, you're at risk. And of course, that's the status of children who are thrust into these positions, whether it's in extreme sports or baseball or football. I mean, how many times do we have to see a professional athlete in their 40s come to Congress and say, I graduated from a major university, but I couldn't read or write? Now, that's a terrible burden.
It's an indictment, I mean, pretty much. And the... well, in where I find, your journey so fascinating in the fact that you had approximately 20 years ago had pooled your experiences with a number of people similarly situated as former child actors and said, let's go out there and do some good. Let's protect people that are out. Let's create an awareness for what's taking place. And I can only imagine just some of the messes that you've probably run across, be they familial, legal, financial, you name it.
Tony, it runs the gamut. It's everything that you've mentioned and much more. And look, when we started A Minor Consideration, that's my wife and I, back in 1990, it was on the heels of 3 suicides of pretty famous kids. The most famous of whom was Rusty Hamer, who was 12 years on the Danny Thomas Show. And when Rusty killed himself, it was like I got a message from God. You have to do something about this, Paul, because by that time I had learned that my experience in my 20s, which were a very difficult time for me, my 20s were tough, was not unique, that others in my cohort had been suffering the same doubts and anxieties and bitterness as I. It was not unique. It was par for the course in the entertainment business, and it needed to stop. And when we began reaching out to other former kid stars, and I'm going back to a contemporary of Jackie Coogan, Diana Sarah Carey, who was Baby Peggy back in the silent era, what I discovered is we naturally began to gravitate toward one another because we knew the game. We had the T-shirt. We had experienced something that is unique in the world and had to learn to live with it. And with a small group of people at first, we began to tackle the real difficult issues. And let me give you the most difficult one that we're still working on. Children in the entertainment business, and this includes sports, are exempt from federal child labor law. Now, what that means is if you work in a decent state with good laws, oversight, and protection, you're reasonably well protected. But what happens if you work in another state which doesn't care about child labor laws? Then you're at risk. And truthfully, between you and me and the people listening, the rules for children ought to be the same everywhere and every when.
And that was really going to lead me to my next question, Paul, which is in the over 20 years that you've been working with a minor consideration. You mentioned what the law in California used to be, and changes on that. What things, or to the degree there have been positive changes, what have they been?
Well, for example, we mentioned earlier about children being the property of their parents. In all states except California, where we've been singularly successful, the children who do the work in the entertainment business now own the money that they earn. I mean, think of that. What a concept, that the person who does the work should own the money. So in California, at least, not only are the parents put in the role as trustees, as in a probate court, but it alters the very dynamic of work in the business. For example, back in the day, before minor consideration and all of our gang got involved, very few children had what we call court-approved contracts. Most all long-term contracts, even back in Hollywood's golden era, had to be approved by the Superior Court. And once that was approved, it was cast in stone. That was your contract. But it never changed the ownership of the money. Now, every kid in California who works not only owns the money, but however small their part may be, still 15% of their gross income is put aside into what we still call the Coogan Fund. So those are kind of the changes. And truthfully, it ought to be universal. It ought to be a condition of employing any child in the entertainment business.
Yeah, for sure, because who speaks out for these kids if adults do not provide for them? That's really...
Yes, you're absolutely right. And Tony, the coolest part about this is that is, frankly, our moral authority. It's not that we were famous when we were kids, but everybody seems to understand we are not doing this for ourselves. We are not ever going to get our childhoods back. We are doing this for the kids who are working today and into the future. Now, along the way, we've had to learn to deal with Social Security Administration, psychiatrists, psychologists. We have to do prison visits. We have to see people when they're hospitalized, when they're destitute. Yes, we do all of that stuff too. But on the overall, in the big issues, the issues where perfectly ordinary people can help us, we've got to address these problems. I mean, this is not unique to Hollywood. Just go to a Little League baseball game and watch the behavior of the parents sitting in the stands, and you'll know what I'm talking about.
And that's really, have you had to sort of pull parents aside and sort of give them whatever you want to call it, reality check lectures, and this is what the world is really like and you need to rethink this thing with respect to your kid, Mr. Parent?
You bet we have, whenever we're permitted. Unfortunately, in these days, there are a whole group of parents who believe, just like their predecessors, that they know what's best for their child. I mean, one of the stories I tell, we had a young kid whose family was on welfare, a young black kid, and he happened to get a part on a television series. And 6 weeks after he landed this really juicy part, his mother, taking him to work, shows up in a brand new Mercedes. I got a call. I was at the studio within 2 hours to sit down and talk with this mother and explain that buying a Mercedes when all you needed was a Chevy is your mistake, and it is not acceptable. It's immoral. It's unethical. You are using your child's resources to elevate your quote-unquote social status, and that's a bad thing. Well, we got the car back to the dealership in the next 2 hours. But that is the kind of thing that we still do to this day. We just had a young girl on a successful family show that had to be, frankly, removed from her stage parents' presence. It just happened just last October. And get that, we haven't even talked about the sexual predation that is all too prevalent in the world of children today. So there are lots of things that we need to do, but the problem remains that the parents are resistant to hearing our advice, thinking they're, oh, so much smarter than we and our parents. And also there's big money involved with some careers. And the people that surround a performer of any age, have a monetary interest in continuing to exploit the child's talent.
Yeah, as a wise old Italian friend often reminds me, money makes the blind man see, and this indeed is the problem. You know,
well, exactly right, and you know, it's a good idea. Always follow the money. I always thought it was amusing with the incredible financial success across many platforms of the Olsen twins, that people persisted in the belief that somehow these, well, very young, but then young teenagers, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, were somehow in charge of their life and destiny. And I think, what an absurdity. What an absurdity. I don't care how big the fortune is you're building. Look to the interests of the adults. And just to make it this more contemporary story, look what's happening to Justin Bieber right now. This kid needs some help.
Yeah, and what will happen in years to come, and that's really the staggering thing, and it just continues to repeat itself. And, you know, Paul, it's amazing. I've so enjoyed this. We're out of time, and we're going to have you on, and we'll keep abreast of your activities as things develop. And you've been nothing but a gracious gentleman, and, you know, so kind to come on to this humble show in Connecticut. And, you know, it's been an honor to speak with you, watch you through the years, and so admiring of your work today. And thanks so much. Have a beautiful sunny day in Southern California. We're almost matching you back here, not quite. So,
all right, thank you, Tony.
Take care, Paul. Paul Petersen, and what more can be said? Actor, child activist, and just an all-around good guy. And we are so grateful. What a show this has been, starting with our 5 guests. We started off this morning with Jim Dreyer, then it was Paul Asciante, then it was Bobby Fiore, Bob Swick, and Paul Petersen. And it's just been a magnificent show. We thank you, our viewers, listeners, friends, and fans, because without you, this cannot happen. So with that, a beautiful sunny day in New Haven, Connecticut, and have a great one. Make it a safe one. Tony DeAngelo. See you 2 weeks from now. Take care, and God bless.